Now, I have a few comments on Milton's Sonnet 19. First, a dual line of thought. The poem has a dual line of thought, and both ideas are epitomized in the final line of the poem. They also serve for only stand and wait. On the one hand, this is a statement of resignation, as the poet expresses an implied submission to the situation of standing and waiting. But the poem is also a statement of justification, as the poet finds a way to assert that they also serve who only stand and wait. Second, a quest motif. Another important thing to learn in reading this poem, I think, is that it is based on an underlying quest motif in which the speaker searches for and finds a way to serve God acceptably. The poem seems to have been built around the implied question: what does it take to please God? But it records how he comes to understand a higher notion of service. Real service is doing the will of God, even if it means that he must stand and wait. Third, God requires service. The key verb serve appears 3 times in this poem and is the linchpin on which the poem rests. In turn, the poem contrasts 2 types of service. One is active service in the world, a type of service that was seemingly unavailable to a person who had recently become blind. In a sense stand, the speaker discovers another type of service that is equally acceptable to God. Professor Leon Reichen calls it a service of private retirement, as opposed to the public service. Though the final image of standing and waiting will add further dimensions to our understanding of the second type of service. Fourth, the universal experience. For the poet, that experience was blindness. But the underlying principle is broader: the irremediable loss, handicap of any type, life-changing injury. The poem does not deal with Milton's physical handicap, but with the spiritual crisis that it engenders, namely a fear that he cannot serve God acceptably. The solutions that the poem offers are also spiritual and are 3 in numbers: submission to God's providence, patience, and hope. Fifth, biblical allusions. This sonnet is a mosaic of biblical allusions. 2 parables of Jesus are particularly relevant. The parable of the workers in a vineyard, Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 to 16, and the parable of talents, Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 to 30. Both parables portray God as the sovereign, who calls his workers or stewards to be active in service, and the judge who rewards his stewards for diligence and, when necessarily, punishes them for inaction. Another particular relevant passage is John chapter 9, verses 1 to 4, in which we read about Jesus' healing of a blind man, accompanied by his famous saying, "We must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. Night comes when no one can work." All of these passages are the informing context for the first 8 lines of the sonnet. 6. Puritanism. Puritanism also provides a context for the poem. Puritan emphasis on vocation, a divine call, produces an outlook for an active work in this world. The octave of this sonnet can be viewed as a Puritan anxiety eviction, as the speaker struggles with the situation of being unable to do what Milton's whole religious background demanded him to do. But Puritan ideals equally determine what happens in a sestet, with its underlying premises of submission to providence as a service to God, and also the ideal of worshipping God as a worthy form of service. The octave runs a course of fear, frustration, and even fundamental rebellion, culminating in the question, doth God exact day labor like the night? A whole complex of feelings and attitudes is expressed in this question, including fear, incredulity, accusation of unfairness, protest, confusion, rebellion. But we can also see that the question is asked funnily, that is, foolishly. The implied answer to the question is no. No one works in a vineyard after nightfall. Similarly, God does not require a service that someone cannot perform. And this sonnet, therefore, opens with a mood of discouragement and grief, yet closes with quiet resignation. 7. The turn. Prosodically speaking, in the first place, by varying the position of the emotional, logical, semantic turn at the beginning of line 9, Milton succeeds in making his thoughts and feelings coherent down to the end of the sonnet. This is also a contribution made by Milton to recover the metrical beauty of the normal Italian sonnet form. Run-on lines. Milton seems to have treasured the device of run-on lines as one of the most effective techniques in his poetic presentation. In this sonnet, we have in all 7 run-on lines. Lines 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, which reinforce emotional enjambment. Metrical substitutions. Against the iambic pentameter background, some metrical substitutions are used in this sonnet as counterpoises to its rhythmical monotony. For example, in the second line, we have a Pyrrhic in the third foot, followed by a spondee in the fourth. A Pyrrhic can reinforce the effects of rapidity, lightness, and ease, while a spondee can reinforce the effects of slowness, weight, or difficulty. But here Milton juxtaposes a spondee with a Pyrrhic, which seems to prepare for the spondee as if by depriving us of a stress and thus making us desire two in succession all the more. In this way, Milton voices his intense grievance at God's apparently unfair treatment of him, The word wide. The word wide is inverted in the second line, not only for the sake of rhyme and the regular iambic fault, but also for firing the connotations of the boundaries terror to the poet. And this is further reinforced by the heavily elevated words world and wide, day and dark. Through the metrical analysis of this line, Milton's craftsmanship in handling the sonnet is clear at a glance.